One of the first verses that really impacted me a lot, I was at a place where men are, some of you might have heard of Freedom House, and I could see these men who probably struggled all their lives. They're in a situation in their life where they've gone down a road they didn't want to be in. Some of them are coming out of prison, some of them coming off the streets, some of them they're there and they're wanting to learn. And one of the things that I read this verse, be strong therefore, show yourself a man. And a lot of guys didn't realize that being a man wasn't what they saw it as. They saw being a man as this guy that had to be macho and tough and strong and no emotions involved, and had to be able to control his own destiny and pick his own path, and there they were, and they didn't realize that God had a plan for them, that God wanted to show them what a man looked like, and it wasn't what their idea was. I mean, I sat there for 40 years of my life thinking that what a man was everything that I wasn't. I used to just completely want to push aside anything that had to do with God because religion got in the way. I just didn't like what that was saying to me. So I had to learn to be what a man was. But as I keep looking at Ephesians 5, I see that this is the chapter where Paul talks about what a wife and what a husband's supposed to look like in a marriage. Before he gets to that, he says to both that we're supposed to submit or be subject to one another. We're supposed to be subject to one another out of reverence or fear in Christ. And then he goes with the one verse that the men love is, wives, be subject to your husbands. I mean, that's a great verse. I love it. Be subject to your husbands, woman. Right here. Follow me. Do what I say. Do what I do. Don't put the pretend on the walls. Don't put the pictures on the walls that you want. You're subject to me because I don't want that. You can't do that. That's what being subject to is. That's what the verse says, right? No. Because what it says is that they're supposed to come alongside of us and be subject to our leadership. Well, we're talking about leadership today, and a lot of us don't understand exactly what that leadership looks like. We want to be a leader in our home, but we want to lead it the way we think it needs to be led. We don't realize that we're supposed to lead our home. This whole verse, this whole thing is, how did Christ lead the church? How is Christ subject to the church? How did Christ serve the church? That was the whole purpose of this verse. As men, we're supposed to lead our wives as Christ served the church. It says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church. Like Steve said, what is love? What does love look like? That was the biggest problem of mine. Anybody remember that song by Foreigner, I Want to Know What Love Is? I want you to show me. The song always resonated in my heart because I never knew what love was. I never knew what love was. I went through life not knowing what love was. It was something that just, whatever the moment took, whatever's there for the minute. It was nothing that had any meaning or any depth to it. It was okay, I love you today, not tomorrow. It was just whatever I wanted love to be, that's what love was at that time. Because there was no foundation, there was no reference point, there was no standard as to what love was supposed to be. It was just a blur, but it was how I wanted it to be. When God tells you, shows you what love is, He wrote that in 1 Corinthians 13. 1 Corinthians 13 says that anything I think, say, or do, if I don't do it in love, then I'm nothing. So I'd been nothing all my life because there wasn't a loving thought, a loving verse, a loving thing that came out of my mouth at any point in time before God came into my life and showed me. Because the first thing it says is that love is patient. If patience lasted more than a half a second, I was out. There was no patience. Kind. What was kind? Kind was, if you're going to help me or you're going to do something for me, I'll reciprocate about half of what you gave me. That was kindness. That's what I thought kindness was. It wasn't arrogant. It wasn't boastful. It wasn't rude. It wasn't self-seeking. There's one for you. It wasn't self-seeking. I mean, love to me, that's all it was self-seeking. I needed to find a way to have something for me, because that's what was important, was me. Nothing else was important. So I had to look at what love was. And Paul shows us that in 1 Corinthians 13 in just a way that is so impacting to me, because, again, it says that anything that I think, if I'm not thinking in love, anything I say, if it's not said in love, or anything that I do, well, that covered the whole spectrum as far as I was concerned. If I'm not doing the things in love, then it's meaningless. There's no purpose in it. So it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Well, that tied the two verses together to me, because how did Christ love the church? I mean, he's been pretty patient, very kind. He wasn't arrogant or boastful. He wasn't self-seeking. He wasn't rude. He bared all things, believed all things, hoped all things, endured all things. I mean, that's our standard. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Okay, I've got now a model that I look at for leadership. That's a tough model to look at. You know, I often get into where I'm talking with guys, and they'll say, you know, I'd do that with my wife if she would just, you know, if my wife were just not griping at me near as much, it'd be easy for me to love her. If she'd get up and make me bacon and eggs in the morning, everything would be great. If my wife would do for me, it would be easy for me to do my leadership job. What? It'd be easy for the leader? Are you kidding me? My responsibility is to lead. If my wife's not doing the things, if my wife's not being subject to me, it says right down there at the bottom of that chapter, nevertheless, I still have to serve my wife. I still have to love my wife. There's no ambiguity in that. That's absolutely what I have to do. If I'm the leader, do I have to wait on my wife to do for me? That's that part of that self-seeking thing, that self-serving. Well, love is not self-seeking. See, that was hard. That's hard for a lot of guys to see, that you can't serve your wife because she's not submitting to you. You can't serve your wife because she's not doing the things that you want to have done. I can't tell you the number of guys that I meet that have that complaint. But what's the problem? Steve Hildebrand was up here telling you, leadership wasn't modeled in his home. He didn't have an idea of what leadership looked like. I promise you, I didn't have an idea what leadership looked like. I grew up with a father and mother, and I had no idea what leadership looked like. None. What leadership looks like is how Christ left us the model. How did Christ leave that model? Every day we're to be serving others, giving ourselves to others. I look at this always and I say, where do you look at for that? And I say, well, let me ask you a question. If in verse 24 it says, but as the church is subject to Christ, so also the wife ought to be like that to their husbands in everything. And I say, how well is the church subject to Christ? So reflect for a second, how well are you subject to Christ? How well are you in your walk in your Christ? How good are you at it? I'm not very good. I fail miserably, and I'm always praying for forgiveness. So the church we try. That's our goal, that's our focus. We want to worship, that's what we want to do. That's where we want to be. We want to be subject and be just serving or be under Christ just as much as possible. That's our love. But we're not good at it.